here an example. So here is an innovation configuration map that would clarify instructional leadership. Meaning, if you watch somebody who is an instructional leader, what does this leader have to do in order for you to declare this person an ideal or characteristic good instructional leader? What you describe in level 1 is ideal. These are the things you strive towards, that you want to definitely see. The more you go from the left to the right, the farther away the person would be from the ideal. In this case, they chose level 4. They didn't go to all level 6. So a vision, maintaining a vision of excellence aligned with mission and vision of the campus. A vision of excellence in teaching aligned with the mission and vision. You can see on the other end, it's not aligned with the campus goals. A balance of content and pedagogical knowledge supported by context knowledge. We don't have much in this particular area for 2 as bad because it stopped on level 3. So level 3 is the leader is learning the content supported by context knowledge. So there is no balance. That's the big part here. Working continuously to establish routine and trust. Few established routines. We're going back to what I think was mentioned before about, you know, the leader shouldn't just know a vision, but how to get there. And that has to be routines, and you've got to establish trust of what you're doing. Clear expectations. On the other hand, works one-on-one with teachers. What is the disconnect here? Why is the leader provides clear expectation and implements structures to align efforts by groups of teachers? Why is it bad that the teacher works one-on-one with teachers? The leader works one-on-one with teachers. Why is it a misalignment in this innovation configuration?
Because it's not efficient. It's really time consuming.
Yeah.
The alignment, you're absolutely right. And the alignment of the efforts you achieve by, everybody needs to hear that. You can maybe if you talk about later, you might actually listen and say, if something goes off, you want the leader to seek out individual people. But that's different from setting expectation and implementing structures. You do that with everybody, so everybody's on the same page. Does that make sense?
Okay. Does it mean that if you, for example, if you work one-on-one with teachers, then that individual teachers won't see the big picture, like where the whole group is going? Am I doing it correctly?
What I'm trying to explain is, and yes, you got partially it correct. What I'm trying to explain is that this is in the undesirable column, right? This is the furthest away from the ideal. It's unacceptable behavior. Only because what you want to achieve with number 4 is expectations and implementing structures to align efforts. If it's about correcting individuals, this would be in this column.
Okay.
What it is, where it ends up is it really aligned with the ideal? The ideal is groups of teachers need clear expectation in implementing strategies together. If I'm now talking with one of you about strategy and then with another one, people hear different things, it gets a huge mess, right? But if it's about, I see a problematic behavior, I could easily see us here writing another level 1 that says, I want the leader to individually address with teachers problematic behavior, right? Then that would be a leadership level 1. Leadership level 4 would be the leader provides criticism in a large group, right? Nobody wants to necessarily hear from a leader in a large group that they did something wrong. Do you see what I'm trying to mention?
Yes, yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Prof, what if the teacher, the leader find out the teacher cannot grab it, the expectation and all those, and the leader go one by one. What about that?
Say that again, please.
Okay, what if the leader found out that one of the teacher didn't really grab what she or he trying to convey or try to deliver? So the next step, the leader go and use the method of one-to-one. What about that? So which level is
this
that?
particular model, in this, what is defined as level 1, it would be seen as problematic. They probably would, for the model or for the implementation, it would be probably better that the teacher who doesn't get it is seeking out first other teachers. And if that doesn't clarify, then it might be brought up again in the group. Because if you bring it up in a group where your leader is present, chances are maybe other people have also trouble, didn't get it. So it helps the group understanding that you bring it up in that setting. Now, I'm not necessarily saying this is the most effective. What I'm saying is the people who constructed this innovation configuration map see it as the ideal action. This is what they set as their norm for their rubric of what clarifies instructional leadership. You can disagree, right? You just found a case where you say, I need to clarify that more. I am not sure that this is the right approach. That's why these levels have to be written by change facilitators and by users who will actually use it, and by experts. They need to come together to first, if you remember my step-by-step guide, they need to look at components. And then in the components, define what is ideal, and then give examples of where the ideal is not met, to realize later on, where are people, right? If you just have a binary, they either have that or they don't. You don't necessarily know how close people are. That's why we have these levels. Because if all your teachers, all your leaders are over here, you know they are a lot far away from your ideal. But if they all are here, you know you have to shift them a little bit, but not too much, because they're not too far off. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Doesn't sound convincing. Seems like there's still. Tell me what, if there's any misunderstandings or it's difficult what I'm saying, please share that.
I think you need to show the connection from the earlier part where things are coming from, because I think for some of the participants, it may not be clear where this is related. I can see that, you know, you have the use and non-use from that description, right? The levels, and then you
These
translate
ones,
here. Yeah.
yeah, these
Yeah,
level
that has-
one comes. Level one comes from a very similar activity than we did yesterday on what are components and features. We did one on what are component and features of active learning.
Yep.
This one is constructed from probably a couple of sessions, workshops, some observations of effective leaders, interviews with people of what they consider good in effective leaders. You take that all, you make a very large laundry list, and then you try to group them and develop core components. And they came up with 8. That's the process. And this is a process that you could give me any topic, any pedagogical innovation that I know of, and I could come up with 8 components, 9 components, whatever it is that I find important. The problem is that's one person doing that. That's why I cannot prescribe that, right? I can only say this is the product of a process that we started yesterday. If you follow that process and then develop components, you end up with something like this. You describe your innovation in terms of observable, ideal actions of whomever you want to act, right? If you have ideal, observable actions by administrators, or ideal, observable actions by faculty, that's where it comes from. This is infused by research, goes into that, observations, interviews. This is a longer process to come up with this part. Let me stop sharing this right now and go back to our Google Doc. Remove this. So we worked on a large laundry list. And if we just say, for example, we're just looking at the role of instructors right now. We are only looking at this part. Now our job would be to identify components. In this way, we have 5 components. We could have 6, 7, 8, 9. This is just an example of how these components are structured. So if I go back and say facilitation, the instructor is not just a knowledge source. So I go here and I would make a statement that says the instructor facilitates the learning process. Now you could argue this is not specific enough. What we can do now is, what does it actually look like? If you have an instructor that facilitates, what would that instructor actually do? You go in a classroom, what would you see the instructor doing? Can you give me a couple examples?
Monitoring, helping.
monitoring and helping. So instructor monitors students' work. Another variation could be, you said helping, something like that?
Yes, helping or giving feedback.
Ah, okay, giving feedback. Instructor gives feedback. You might also say, and this is interesting because I'm making a non-statement. Instructor doesn't talk always, right? If I walk in and there's a lot of students talking, but not the instructor, I know that instructor is facilitating. Let them talk, let them explore by themselves. So now we have this component. The instructor facilitates the learning process. These are all acceptable variations, right? If you go in a classroom and you see an instructor monitoring student work, this would fall under this component. Now, you have to decide as the owners of this innovation, is that enough if an instructor does only that? They don't give feedback and well, this one is, monitoring student work would exclude each other. But if the instructor doesn't give feedback, just monitors, is that enough?
No.
No. And if that's not enough, then what I do is monitors students' work and gives feedback. It has to happen together, right? That's one variation where I know there's facilitation going on. Doesn't always talk. Well, we could say gives clear instructions. I'm sure, and if we look back, we had like chooses topics. We could choose that, for example, too, but that's not facilitation. Let's look through this list and see, do we have anything that would indicate here another variation of facilitation that we haven't seen, that we didn't move to the identify component yet?
I think the other one is knows how to set up the environment.
Where is that in here?
No, it's not here.
So you just indicate this is actually an iterative process. While you're writing these, you might say this is not enough. There are other variations of this component that are not listed yet, right? So what is the next thing you do? So you do that for 5 other components. Like, for example, if we go back here, we can, for example, say, formative assessment is something that goes beyond. So instructor provides formative assessment. This might be another component. Now we need to look at what does it actually look like? If you go in a classroom and you see an instructor doing formative assessment, what would that instructor do?
Questioning.
Questioning students. Yep. What else?
Questioning and listening to students.
Say that again, the second verb.
Questioning and listening to students.
Yeah. But also listen. Provide criteria for success could be another one, right? If you can't assess people if you don't tell them what they have to do. Again, these things, they come from the innovation. That's why you need to understand this whole process of understanding your innovation on an action level. What are essential pieces? And they, again, the essential pieces can come from literature, they come from observations, they come from interviews. So does that make sense? How we construct these components and variations right now?
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
It is work that you do, and you know, if you do that as a group, you also will play with each other in terms of giving feedback, right? If you write that and one of you says, wait, there's something missing, or what about this and what about this? So this is a team effort again. Now you're going to a map of innovation. Now you have component one was instructor facilitates the process. So you might repeat that here. What is ideal? What is acceptable? So you might move all of these to ideal level. This is what you expect to know. You might say, doesn't talk always, maybe we'll put that in the acceptable area. This is a very weak thing, right? The instructor doesn't always talk. So you might want to move that. You might want to move that in acceptable category. Now, for each one of these, you would provide examples of what is unacceptable. What I have seen is usually you don't use all 5 levels. You might have 1 or 2 unacceptable. One is farther away. This one, remember, the higher the number, the farther away you're from the ideal. You go far away, and one of them is closer away. So for example, an easy way to do that is instructor monitors and doesn't give feedback. Right? He's doing half of that, what we say here. You might say here, instructor does not monitor and not give feedback. Instructor doesn't talk always. So an unacceptable form might be instructor only doesn't talk, or you can say students are not talking when instructor doesn't talk, right? Means when the instructor might hand out papers, that's the only time when the instructor doesn't talk. But the students don't do anything active in that time when the instructor doesn't talk. Gives clear instructions. Now you can say giving instructions is closer, but it's not clear, right? We clearly make a distinction here. The word clear is missing here. And now gives no instructions. Now you have an instrument at your hand when you can go into a classroom where somebody is doing active learning and you look for are they facilitating? And you're looking for the presence of these things, and you hope you will not find these things. When you find these things, you take note of that, and you're looking how to build your next intervention to address these things. And you do that with all components. If you have all these components constructed, then you would go as a next step. So we just went through this list of components, dimensional variations. Now you would interview, you would observe people, and you would adjust. You have then a draft. You go again, interview, observe, and construct a final list. So this is the iterative process. If you're not doing that, you might miss out that something is really important in facilitation or in active learning, but you didn't capture it. If you go, for example, in classrooms and you use this rubric and you watch an episode and a teacher is amazing of what he or she does, and you have this not listed anywhere as ideal, you're missing something, right? Or it's not a variation of something existing ideal. That's where then the refinement comes. And then you know, okay, this might be ideal as well. Does this make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
So this innovation configuration map is then guiding your development for professional development. It guides how you check for effectiveness. It is your main document that you will refine over time if something changes. But whatever is not listed on this document as ideal, you shouldn't be teaching. And if you teach it and it doesn't show up on your configuration map, then there's a disconnect, right? It's kind of an evaluation tool for your own work. Now we have again silence in the forest.
Thinking.
Yeah.
Professor Johannes, I just want to confirm. So basically, actually, in this configuration map building, it is an iterative process, right?
Yes.
It is an iterative process. So actually, it's like a trial and error also. Okay, until you get a finalized one. Is it?
Yes, eventually you might say, we are done with the development and now it's time, you know, in the beginning when you develop and refine, you work with smaller amounts of people because you're driving it towards a larger amount of people.
We have the pilot first, right?
Right.
Pilot study first.
Yes.
But I don't think it's a trial and error.
It's a pilot study.
It's strategize. It's like you have to map your innovation towards that map. So it's not like it's random what shows up in the innovation configuration map. It's not random. It has to be like, is the innovation requiring that? Is that important for the innovation? Can we call it active learning if this shows up or this is not showing up? So there is a normative aspect. Like there is a, you know, if you add here, the instructor has to dance on the table, then people would say, well, that might be very entertaining, but it's not active learning, right? Maybe it is. I don't know. There might be a model where instructors dance on the table. But you know what I mean? It's like it has to match what the literature says with what people in the field think what active learning is. It has to match with that.
Hello, Johannes.
Yes.
I would like to know, how do I know whether or not the IC map I constructed is accurate or not, or is correct or not?
there are several check marks in there. So the one is, that's why you involve experts. That's why you involve, and that's why you do observations. Let's say you have a nearly final IC map and you go into a classroom and you observe, and whatever you observe does not fit very well with your map, right? There's elements missing, you're seeing amazing teaching and it doesn't show up as ideal, or you see somebody would score very high, but you also like, it's not active learning, but they would score high on many elements, then your map is also off, right? If you capture non-active learning with your map, it's not precise enough. So then you would iterate until you feel comfortable, and that means you would have to go do more observations, or you are doing more review. And let's say after a couple revisions, you go into a classroom and you're like, nothing came out of that new. We captured it. And you go in another classroom and you're like, yep, that seems very valuable. We capture most parts of what we want to see. And people were not sneaking by doing things, and we had to score them high, but they were not really doing things. You might also find in your innovation map that the combination of 2 or 3 things are more important than the individuals, right? You might say an active learner, an active learning facilitator, instructor, does component 1, 3, and 4. If only 1 and 3 are ideally there and 4 is missing, I wouldn't call it active learning. You would make a note in your map and build a cluster. Does that make sense? Accuracy it's not as objective. It's not like clear and hard and fast rule. Now you're done. This is iterative. It's in a way, it's like qualitative education research that is in the area of qualitative research.
Johannes.
All right.
I know you explained that CBAM is developed based on innovations for innovations in the classrooms.
Yes.
Have you ever seen it being used for innovations in the whole program curriculum, or for innovations at the institutional level?
Yes. Yes, I will send you a couple examples of innovation maps. I have a couple more here that were not able to show right now, but I can send you a couple where it's like how to develop leaders, for example, is not a classroom intervention, right? What is a good instructional leadership model, or how to implement larger innovations in a department, for example. So I can definitely send you a couple examples.
Okay, thanks. Is there any innovations at the institutional level where you would require more than one IC map?
You always require an IC map for every individual stakeholder group. So let's say you do an institutional one, you will have an IC map for administrators, for faculty, for staff, possibly for students if they're involved, because it's always focused on the ideal of what somebody does and who is that player or actor. You would make one for administrators, one for faculty, one for staff. Sometimes you even have to say, there are support staff and there are research staff. Maybe I need to separate them. Maybe there's a difference between higher level administrators and mid-level administrators. We expect different things to see. So you have to differentiate then on how many, you know, in classroom, you have an instructor. I mean, that's relatively simple, but you might also have an teaching assistant, and you expect different things from a teaching assistant, or you expect different things from peer leaders if you involve students as peer leaders. So that all the different roles require different IC maps.
Okay, thanks. So we have a lot to make.
It's rewarding as a process because you clarify a lot, but it's also daunting because you gotta set boundaries at some point. Like when you do an institutional change, it's very difficult. How granular do you really want to go? So you presumably stay a lot more on higher level aspects.
Yeah, okay.
Because, you know, an institution has so many different actions. If you map them all, you're not operating anymore. You're just mapping your actions for years. So it's like, where do you draw the line and say, if this is present, the other things might follow. And then you identify, we don't know, right? It sounds good. We don't know if that's effective enough. Is it really leading towards the change we want? And that's where the refinement comes in also. It's easier if you have a body of literature that prescribes a certain innovation, and you just map it out then, versus when you actually may possibly have to do institutional research and testing things out. And if they've proven to be more successful, then you implement, and then you put them into your IC map. But that's a longer process.
Yep.
Any other questions right now?
Professor Johannes, I think if this is the case, there are cases where we may have same innovation, but it may result with different configuration management for different batch of students or different batch of or different organization, right? Because I can see that in CBAM, actually we focus on people and the process. So, you know,
Yes.
different organization or different batch of students, we have different people, different respondents. So there are cases with same innovation, we may have different configuration management for, you know.
Because you have different variations that you find acceptable, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. You have actions, they're like, yep, that's still acceptable. That's, you know, I could see 100 different ways of doing discussions. This particular instructor does a lot of Socratic questioning. This instructor puts their students together in small groups, let them discuss and come back. This instructor doesn't do that, only big group discussions, right? You have variations then. And if you're comfortable with the variations and say, it's still active learning, you don't mind, right? What if they do any of that, you're okay. If some of them are not okay, you need to specify that, right? Then you must say, that's actually not anymore, right? But that's a case-to-case decision. But, you know, as you absolutely, we deal with individual faculty, and we deal with what I'm comfortable with. You deal with personalities. You know, some people are really outgoing and they like the debate, and others are not liking debates, but they still try to do some form of discussion, right? And you need to allow that. And so, yes, absolutely, you will end up with innovation, which in spirit is still the same, and how it looks implemented, very, very different. We oftentimes in educational innovation, we oftentimes confuse the spirit of the innovation with the implementation. You have to put people in small groups of 3 people to do something. Well, if it's about group work, can I put them in groups of 4, or am I violating now something? Can I change groups, or do they have to stay all the same, right? There's a point where you micromanage, where you over-prescribe, and people lose interest then because they're like, well, how is mine really that different if I have group work? And you have to have really clear case of why something is better, or why one thing is not acceptable anymore.
Okay, but
I would like to know, sorry.
it's okay, Dr. Lai, you go first.
Oh, all right. So, Your Highness, I would like to know, during the IC map construction, when the stages of concern come into play. The concern measurement take place during the beginning or along the whole process?
Along the whole process. Because if you see, for example, in a classroom or in an innovation, let's say you go and observe based on your IC map, right? And you note down there are certain levels of use, there are certain ideal things that are met and others are not. You might actually ask, why did I not observe that? And you might hear different levels or stages of concern about why that wasn't implemented, right? For example, if you see a lot of different elements, but you don't see, for example, group work, and you decide the group work is essential, I would ask then the instructor, we touched on that. Is there a reason why you don't use group work? And if the instructor says, I'm really uncomfortable, I don't know how to manage group work, you look at that and you realize in the language they use and what they do, they're falling in a certain stage of concern. You might do a survey over all the people who did the innovation, and you might see this person is really spiking in the management of the innovation. That's their highest concern right now, right? They understand it. They have low awareness concern, low informational concern, low personal concern, and management is suddenly way up. That means they need a lot more in terms of how to actually do it. And so the stages of concern play a role in checking what is underlying use that is there or use that is missing.
All right, so in conclusion, during the ICMET construction, the constant measurement have to take place along the process, and at the same time, we also have to measure, have to determine the level of use.
Yes.
All right, it's clear. Thank you.
Good. Yeah. Now it's like it's really good question. I mean, this is the core of it is a super innovative, iterative process. It's super iterative because you always check what do they do and why they might do something or why they miss something. That's where the stages of concern and the levels of use come together. The innovation configuration map just tells you what do you want to see them doing, why they're not doing, and that's stages of concern. They help you design better instruction or professional development for instructors because you know a little bit more. You're not just seeing yes or no, they do that or not. You also, with the stages of concern, you see a little bit why.
Yes, the level of concern and the level of use can also be used as a mechanism to check whether or not our IC map is correct.
Yes.
Or not.
So for example, if you see a lot of instructors not using group work, you might give them a CBAM survey that's not anymore about active learning as the innovation. You give them a CBAM survey and call the innovation group work. And look then at the result. That might be now a very different result than when you say active learning as the innovation. The group work, asking more specifically about something you don't see much, gives you a nuanced image of where they are. So you can pinpoint a little bit if you see certain things people struggle with, you can actually just target that for your assessment or for your data collection.
Yes, all right.
I'm cognizant about time. I think we're running over, and
Yes. Okay.
but it's good. A lot of questions, and so I'm, if you have other questions or anything, please let me know. I mean, Professor Herrera has my contact information, so I'm of course available. I make a little package of the slides and the examples that I mentioned, and I'll make sure to send that in the next couple of days to Professor Herrera, and then you can disseminate it to everybody who is interested.
Yep. Johannes, we've also made a recording of the workshop. I'm just going to put it on YouTube. Would you mind to have it open or have it as an unlisted video? We will edit the blank parts. I can show you. You can look at it first and decide.
Yeah, send it to me and I'll look at it first.
Okay. Okay. So we will put it as unlisted first so that you can look at it.
Yes. Sounds good.
Yeah.
So that is an example of honest broker, Prof. Honest broker.
Yeah. Yes. That's we have
honest broker. Is it honest broker or is it context? Right.
Yeah,
I gave a similar workshop in Finland, and I did it very, very differently because it is different cultural contexts and different educational systems. And I had a lot of presumptions here, right? About I was 3 times in Malaysia, but what do I really know about how you work with faculty development? Very little. So there's certain assumptions I took, and in other contexts, I might do that very differently. And so it could be misleading for people who think this is a workshop on how to do CBAM in general, right? It might be more CBAM in your context, because your questions, for example, from the first day, shaped really how I changed my second day. But I don't mind being online. I just want to make sure it's not I just want to make sure it can't be misconstrued as
presentable. Presentable.
Yeah. Well, it's not a generic CBAM workshop, right? That's what I want to avoid, that people Google for a CBAM workshop, they listen to that and think that's what it is. That's, there's a lot more to it. And I think in the process of us working together, there has been a lot, like, for example, anybody who listens to that video, they have no idea when I say, oh, remember in the diffusion game.
Yeah, I think it's more on innovation, right, Johan? It's more on innovation. Right. As CBAM is part of, the innovation initiative that we have been discussing for 2 days.
Yes.
Okay, so I think we have an idea now how to start. Although I don't know whether I know we will run into questions again once we start doing it, but I think that's the best way to learn. That's the only way to learn. We have to do it ourselves.
Do we have part 2 CBAM?
Yes, we can. If Johannes want to do a part 2.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll do it on a Saturday and Sunday again.
You know,
Because-
it might be good if you worked on something, then we make that a feedback session and co-construction. So it's more like a workshop, right? We are working together,
Yes, yes.
just as a possibility.
Yeah, yeah. I think that would be better. Okay, so thank you very much, Johannes. Thank you everyone for spending
Thank
your
you.